Kyle here from All Medium Reviews, Pure Reason Revolution Week, video number 3. Hopefully later today I'll do video number 4 on, in effect, their second proper full-length album, the third sort of official release. But 2009's Amor Vincit Omnia, and this version, I think it was on Super Bowl, so they had been signed to Super Bowl after everything with Sony happened. This album came out, it was April 6th, I guess. And they had played, I think it was actually 2 tracks. At least played 2 tracks live from here before they recorded it or released it. Victorious Cupid, which was a single, and, you know, I have that. I had it. Probably another one. It's on that video I posted back in 2016. And also the song Due Ex Machina, or Due Ex Machina, Due Ex Machina, which is also the name of a band. But, so, yeah, I mean, getting into it, it was definitely a different kind of record from The Dark Third and, you know, Cautionary Tales for the Brave. Weird book here. It's all like backwards and everything. Oh, it's backwards on the other side. More electronic, more industrial sounding, more synth driven, you know, more trip hop influenced, more Vincit Omnia. I guess the whole premise of that is based on, it's like love conquers all. So I've thought about this really since it came out back in 2009, and I really like explored it in depth. But, you know, the concept of love conquers all. I wonder if they intended or hoped to release it actually on Valentine's Day, which it came out, like, I think April 6th. So it wasn't obviously on Valentine's Day. It was right after, like, April Fool's, but it wasn't that far. But it could have potentially come out on Valentine's Day. But it's a different record. It shares some similarities. They had done the track Golden Clothes from, you know, 2007's, you know, deluxe edition of, and put it up. Golden Clothes originally was on MySpace. That was still in MySpace now, but Golden Clothes was very electronic. So was Borgen's Vor. Both those tracks I think had been in MySpace, but so you could tell they were going to emphasize keyboards and electronics more. But one thing I should correct, on the first video I did, Jamie Wilcox is not the drummer. He's a guitarist, an additional guitarist, and played with them from 2006 to 2011. Greg John, you know, they had a bunch of different guitarists, basically, like a lot of the members, but John Courtney's brother played drums with them, and then that was in 2006, and then later they had a different drummer. I was just looking that up. I mean, you should know this, but a gentleman by the name of Paul Glover, and then he was on all their early records. But getting into Amor Vincit Omnia itself, I mean, Victorious Cupid is a great track, very romantic, but it has the kind of the riffs and the crescendos. There's a lot of use of, like, what is it? Not reverb, but there is some auto-tune on a few tracks, but not that song. But that gated vocal style that they use for effects, they try to make it sound very kind of compressed and backgroundy, almost like off of voicemail. Deo Ex Machina, I mean, you could hear Nine Inch Nails' influence. It's very, the industrial influence. Deo Ex Machina is probably the most, although they use the heavy riffs on, obviously music before Amor Vincit Omnia, but as much as this is very driven by keyboards and synthesizers, electronics, there's still a lot of heavy riffs. Now, some of it sometimes might be, I've always wondered if it's keyboards, but it's probably, a lot of it is still guitar textures. I would say that they still retain the vocal harmonies, but they're a little more refined. They kind of blend more with the electronic the use of keyboards, than they did on the Dark Third. And they're maybe more, from a word stand, it's still kind of more like poetry, but they're not as crammed in and they're not as sort of obscure wording. A lot of them are just more common phrases. And again, we're talking about like a love story or love or loving someone as opposed to some astral folk and space sci-fi adventure. I don't know. There's a couple of kind of more extended pieces. One being apogee slash requiem for the lovers. It's apogee that what means like the peak of something, the height. I actually googled it because I know I've heard that term for years. It's the highest point in the development of something. So, and I think it's sort of in a relationship. That's kind of what I'm wondering if it's. And of course, you get the contrast of John Courtney and Chloe mostly. You different phrases or different chants, different harmonies, different vocal textures. I don't know if that's supposed to be illustrating the apogee of a relationship between two people, a man and a woman or whatever, or it could be something else. But that it gets intense, but it still works. I mean, it's just the way they're using the fat synths and sort of some of those heavy punchy riffs and the sort of dynamics work. The opening track, I didn't mention Les Mahlers. I don't know how it's pronounced. Malheurs, if you can even see that, because you can tell I bought this obviously when it came out. I pre-ordered and everything. This came with it came with a DVD. And at the point in 2009, I was buying CDs. I wasn't buying vinyl really. I was bringing my compact disc with me to work to listen to at work and everything. So it unfortunately, stuff takes its wear and tear. I mean, it did a lot of burning, a lot of copying back then, of course. But I still like to have the actual original first, physical recordings with me at times. But that song Les Mahlers, whatever, however you say it, is a fun opening track. It's again very synth driven, very it's kind of setting the stage of this is not exactly the sort of this our sound is a little different, I guess is what they were saying with that opening track. But it's catchy and it kind of flows really well. It kind of gets upbeat. But I will say that you have that track and you have Deo Ex Machina. I mean, you have the string of Victorious Cupid. This little interlude, Keep Me Sane / Insane, which, it's like 30 seconds. It's just kind of... There were parts on the Dark Third they used that. It's just like it's an interlude, it's an intermezzo, with John and Courtney chanting, just a bed of synths for 30 seconds. But Apogee, Deo Ex Machina. I feel like after Deo Ex Machina, the album is more mellow. It's more romantic. I mean, there's a romantic... Because I think this album, Amor Vincit Omnia, is about love, so it's romantic. But I think the most romantic parts of it, Victorious Cupid has those harmonies that are romantic, but I think starting with Bloodless is very romantic. Disconnect is a track that's, listening again today, it does sound a lot like Daft Punk. They're using auto-tune or some kind of vocal effects. There aren't too many just straight vocal lines or chants in it. It's more driven almost entirely by the synths, but it's more mellow and soothing and romantic. Bloodless is probably the most romantic piece on here. And then there's The Gloaming, which is a 9-minute sprawling piece that, while sprawling per se, I guess you could say it flows really well, and it's probably the most, fat synth driven. The last 3 to 4 minutes of it is totally features with it's like a synth solo. You call it technical keyboards, it's like a wall of synths, but it kind of builds and builds. It's just kind of very atmospheric, something you'd hear at a dance club or, soundtrack to some kind of film or video or something like that. The Gloaming, the term gloaming. And the final track, AVO, sort of in effect, sort of like the title track in effect, Amor Vincit Omnia, AVO, is very kind of gentle and calming, and it's driven by a piano and some echoing. Lots of echoing. I mean, they did the echoing on the Dark Third, but I think they used echoing even more on this. It's just layers of echoes of the vocals, the chanting, the oohs, the ahs, the kind of the textures. It's I mean, I guess you could say they brought back the Bright Ambassadors of Morning theme on the Dark Third on that last part. Tried to show the magic Ambassador's Return. I don't know if there's really too many reprises in this. A little bit, I think, you get a reprise of Victorious Cupid's theme on AVO. It's It's kind of, but it's more stripped down. It's like, you know, it is John and then Courtney as a support vocalist. But yeah, I don't know if it's like a love story or a, what's that word? Like an unrequited love story or a love tragedy, a tragic love story. This is supposed to be demonstrating sort of in Greek mythology. Maybe that's where they're drawing from, or maybe even Shakespeare. So, but I find that this album, as much as it's a difference in style, it worked on a lot of levels, and it also didn't overstay its welcome. It was like the right blend, being slightly similar, you know, those big lush vocal harmonies that they had. But I think it's a step in sort of, in some ways, in maturity and doing something different. It's more grounded. Although, I think if they continue just to solely use this kind of approach, which some of their more recent stuff, which I'll get into obviously in the coming videos, have, I think it kind of gets to be a bit much in that it's good for that one kind of period of time. And a lot of people that love the Dark Third didn't like this record that much because it's like, it's all keyboards. It's almost the similar kind of feeling that Rush fans felt like in the 80s when they went and became so synth and keyboard driven. But I like it. I love it oftentimes when keyboards play a big role. I mean, you don't want to overdo them. And again, if they would have done AVO Part 2 and 3, which they didn't really, they did at points, I think it would have been too much. That whole indietronica thing that I'm so into, Apes and Androids and all these bands, Mute Math did a little bit of it, Chroma Key. Pure Reason Evolution are very, they kind of brought the keyboards to the forefront as much as they have all these guitarists. And it worked from a songwriting standpoint really well, even though they had everything that happened with, you know, being on Sony and then not being dropped by Sony, and so they were an independent band. And you know, I mean, I'll talk about their history. They had, of course, the Gap, so their history was maybe kind of uncertain. But they're like, well, sometimes stress or challenges makes for better art, and I think maybe in some ways, I don't know the exact details. I mean, the DVD on this I think has some interviews, and I haven't watched it probably since I bought this. But talking about where they were coming from an inspiration standpoint, but yeah, I really like this record. I thought they talked about it, mentioned that it was going to be released on vinyl. I think it's the only record of theirs that hasn't come out on vinyl this year, or maybe next year. So if it does, I'm definitely going to look forward to get it. But what's your feeling on Pure Reason Revolution's second album from 2009, Amor Vincit Omnia? Do you think it's too keyboard driven? Do you love the keyboard? Do you think it worked? Do you think it was great that it was a sort of a contrast to the Dark Third? Love to hear about that. But thank you for watching. I'm going to do the next one, Hammer Anvil, which came out the following year next, later day. But again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.